I'm happy to comment. I'm happy to comment on those. So this book, I got interested in working on the story of Cynthia Hesdra after I was asked by the CGIS Institute, which many of you might be familiar with, which I believe is still in Pomona, whereby there were a lot of events happening around the 400th anniversary commemorating Henry, commemorating Hudson's voyage along the river that now bears his name. And so the CGIS Institute, along with some other groups, were really concerned. They wanted to make sure that communities of color, Black communities and otherwise, were not forgotten in that quadricentennial. And so they asked me to do some research about the economic and social contributions of Black people along the communities in the Hudson River. And so as I was doing this research for them, which included a lot of different information, I kept coming across the name of the Hesdra family. And if you are a longtime Nyack resident, you've probably seen prior to the bench dedication a historical marker that mentions Edward Hesdra that's located on Main Street near 9W. And so, and you may have heard the name Hesdra in other places. But as I was doing research about the economic contributions of Black people along the Hudson River, I also came across the name Cynthia Hesdra and what I thought was a really fascinating story. And so anyone who was around me and around 2009, when I was doing this research, might remember me in the library, constantly on the computer, looking at census records and trying to fit Cynthia Hesdra's name into any conversation that I was having, whether it was relevant or not. And I really appreciate the support that I received then and now from the Historical Society of the Nyacks. So James Hirschberger, who's no longer with us, was very supportive, and of course Wynn Perry as well as Betty Perry. So appreciate their support all along. And so I started doing this work. And as with all of my work, I think it's important, even if we're talking about an individual, that we also put it into a larger historical context. And so, although I'll be talking specifically about Cynthia Hesdra and why I think she's an important historical figure in the book, I also wanted to look at just Black pioneers in Rockland County more generally. And of course, I'm not the only one to do this work. Carl Nordstrom has the book Nyack in Black and White. Alice and Alicia Crow have done some really great work, both in films and in articles that you can check out if you'd like. And so, according to my research and research done by others, we can see that people of African ancestry have called Rockland County home for centuries. Look at some of the Black people who worked alongside white immigrants as bricklayers in nearby Haverstraw. Looked at the Lawson family, who I believe was near Piermont and Spark Hill area and had a carriage company. Also, some people don't know that not only were there free Black people during the enslavement period in America, but that some played an important role in the establishment of Rockland County. And so I note in the book that free Black men like Nicholas Emanuel and John DeVries were original shareholders in the Tapan patent in the late 1700s. And so you have some people, some families in Nyack now that may be descended from these folks. And so I also note that when people talk about slavery, they oftentimes think about it as a Southern phenomenon, as if it didn't happen in other places. I mean, where I am right now near Baton Rouge, Louisiana, between here and New Orleans, there are so many plantations, and some people seem to be obsessed with maintaining that legacy and romanticizing about it. But I like to point out to folks here and elsewhere that you also had slavery take place in places like Rockland County and other places in the North. And so in the book, I also talk about how there was slavery in Rockland County and about the debate about, how we are to assess the significance or importance or contribution or impact of slavery on Rockland County more broadly. And so just include some numbers that I found in Carl Nordstrom's book that looks at the number of slaves that were in Rockland County. And you see how that changes over time until we have the ending of slavery in Rockland County. And then, so I was born and raised in Nyack. If you want to guess my age and you're a longtime Nyack resident, then you could probably tell how old I am if I tell you that I went to both Lake Road and Liberty. So they changed the name of the school from Lake Road to Liberty. I spent 2 years in the old high school and 2 years in the new high school. I remember when the Nanuet Mall was the only mall, and I still call the Palisades Mall the new mall. And so, being a longtime Nyack resident, when I saw some of the names that popped up in some of the research that I was doing, I couldn't help but elaborate on that. So, for example, you all know very well Depew Avenue and the Depew name, and so you see some examples of some of these individuals actually owning enslaved people or captured Africans, however you want to refer to them, and some other information. Also, another quote here about Peter Depew and how he purchased a human being for $270 at that time in 1806. Picture of Tunis Depew, who I learned from Bill Batson's recent discussion about the library that he had some role in helping to establish the Nyack Library, if my memory is serving me correct. So again, the point is that these are familiar names that we see all around town, and yet we don't necessarily think about them or associate them with the enslavement period, but that slavery, was a real thing that happened even in Rockland County. And those quotes again, I think those are coming directly from Carl Nordstrom's book on Nyack in black and white. And I'm happy to share these PowerPoint slides with anyone who's interested later. And as I mentioned, so Nordstrom and others have debated about whether slavery was experienced in the same way in places like Rockland County as maybe in the South, where they had larger plantations, and whereas in Rockland County, maybe someone owned a handful of slaves. Again, neither situation is a good situation when you're treated as chattel, but just recognizing that there are some similarities and differences in experiences with slavery in Rockland County relative to other places. And so, and again, putting that in some context, just so as we think about the life and times of Cynthia D. Moore, who becomes Cynthia Hesdra, wanted to just weigh in on some of the issues related to slavery in Rockland County, and then to talk more specifically about Cynthia D. Moore. And as you can see in the slide that I have presented here, she was born in 1808 in Tapan, and those of you who are in Rockland County know that that's not very far from where the library is. Her parents is John and Jane Moore. I didn't come across a lot of research about Jane Moore specifically, but I did learn about John Moore. So some of the research that I found revealed that John Moore was part Native American or from an indigenous population, and then also part Black. He operated some sawmills and other types of mills near Spark Hill. So where, for those of you again who are familiar with the area near where St. Charles AME Zion Church is, he had mills there. And he also had some relationships with the Depew family. I believe it was Peter Depew in particular. And he was known as a successful individual. And I'll also say too that there are some answers to questions that you all may have that I still don't have answers to. So this is by no means the full accounting of the life of Cynthia Hesdra. Is what I could uncover. And so, for example, this is like, I've said this in other places, like being a history detective. For the longest, I was trying to find out the names of her parents and so forth, and then had that confirmed once I went online and found Find the Grave website, and someone had actually located her headstone, which I'll show you later, that included more information. But so Cynthia D. Moore, she met and married a man by the name of Edward Hesdra, and from what I could gather, Hesdra's father, Leon, was a planter in Virginia of either French or Portuguese ancestry who owned slaves. Hesdra's mother was a free Black woman from Haiti, that's Edward Hesdra. And then the circumstances around which Cynthia Hesdra's freedom was purchased, I could not uncover, only that it occurred during the course of their marriage. The couple settled in New York. Cynthia Hesdra operated several successful businesses in New York City and in Nyack. She owned property in New York City, Nyack, and Bergen County, New Jersey. And this is a map at the time. Again, when I did this presentation originally in 2009, that showed what the area where she had owned property previously. And again, although Edward Hesdra has received a lot of attention historically in Nyack for his involvement in the Underground Railroad, which I'll talk about, and some other ways, I kept coming across the Hesdra name, and clearly much of the property that they own was actually in her name. And some facts that I uncovered, and I'll talk a little bit more about her story. But so Cynthia Hesdra accumulated all these assets, but she never had any biological children. She was generous with her nieces and nephews who were connected with some of the Ciscos and Swans. I know that I think I saw Dorothea on here with some of her ancestors. And so she had a connection, a biological connection to what was a slave community called Skunk Hollow. And so she had connections in Nyack, familial connections in Nyack. And so when she passed away, there was no evidence of a will initially. And so then, of course, there was a battle over her fortune. She had amassed about $100,000. And again, she also owned a lot of property in Nyack as well as in New York City. And that's not in contemporary dollars. So I didn't convert that to 2021. So if we were to try and convert that, we would find that she would have been considered a millionaire. And so there was a battle over her fortune where her clearly Black relatives were trying to get some access to her fortune, and her husband was trying to get all of her fortune. And I should have also mentioned the one thing I did come across about Edward Hesdra that I thought was interesting is that he was described as a Jewish mulatto in one reference, and so just wanted to mention that as well. And so, and they had a court case, and what gets interesting about this battle over her fortune is that, again, no one has any evidence of a will, and then suddenly Edward Hesdra produces one. And if you use your imagination and you haven't read the book yet, you can kind of draw your own conclusions as to what that will that he suddenly found said. And it basically left everything to him, and also said that Cynthia Hesdra desired for her grave to be well kept. And so, of course, Cynthia Hesdra's biological family didn't go for that. And so they brought in experts who, forensic document experts, we would consider them today. But when they did this was a relatively new science, if you will. And so what's precedent setting as well about Cynthia Hesdra's case is that it was the first time that a new law that had just been passed a week or two prior to the case, was actually brought up in an actual case. And so never before in New York State had was someone able to compare a signature that was in question with a known signature. And so what you are looking at here is an entry from the Freedmen's Bank. So some of you may know that after the end of slavery, that there were freedmen's banks that were established. It didn't turn out very well, but people who were formerly living under the physical bondage would have accounts. And so this is an entry for Cynthia Hesdra, where she put away some money for one of her nephews, I believe. And so, yeah, I mentioned that about the signatures. And so ultimately what happens is that Cynthia Hesdra's family, they also implicate a number of people in what they say was the creation of a forged document. And so one of those individuals is listed here as Peter Stevens. And Peter Stevens used to be a justice of the peace. He also helped to establish a fire company in Nyack. And so he was well respected. And here you have Cynthia Hesdra's family accusing him of engaging in this scheme to try to get all of her property and so forth. And the handwriting experts essentially supported the claim of Cynthia Hesdra's biological relatives that the document was indeed forged. But the judge threw all that out, basically dismissed the experts and what they were doing as junk science. And on top of that said, Peter Stevens was someone of a great reputation and that he would never get caught up in something like that. So all of Cynthia Hesdra's fortune ended up going to her husband. And so I list some of the names that were associated and involved with the case. And when you read the book, when you read articles from the New York Times and other sources, you'll see some of these names come up. And some that you might find associated with the Nyack Library. I recall, I think I'm not sure how much renovation you all have done since I've been back to the library. I know you've been closed due to the pandemic for a while, but I believe that Quentin McAdams' name was near like a fireplace in what used to be the front part of the library. So I don't know if that's still there, but I remember seeing that. And then again, some names that might be familiar with the Onderdonk family connected with this case as well. And the Onderdonks used to own a business. As some of you might recall, this is not a new picture, but in this general area on Main Street. And then, as I mentioned, in addition to Cynthia Hesdra's case being fascinating because she had such a great fortune, and because there was a battle over that fortune, and because it was a precedent-setting legally, and to add even more onto that, I came across evidence to support that she participated in the Underground Railroad. So many of you may know that you had individuals in different places who would support individuals who were trying to escape the brutal physical bondage in which they were forced to live. And so some scholars have said that Nyack was a station between Jersey City and Newburgh, New York. And so there have been different, and just to look at what the Underground Railroad might have looked like. So I've also talked about some other names and folks that are associated with abolitionism in Nyack. And then there's some newspaper articles that have covered the experiences of people that were escaping from physical bondage. And so in the book, I talk about some of the descriptions of the property that some historians believe was used as part of the Underground Railroad. Initially, some folks argued that it was a house that was located where this fire department is now that was used. And then I've seen others contend that it was probably one of the other properties that Cynthia Hesdra owned that was closer to Nyack Brook or near the Hudson River. So I don't think it's in dispute about whether or not she owned the property that was used in the Underground Railroad, but in terms of its physical location, I think you might find some folks debating that. And I don't know, I like maps and I like looking at older maps. This is a map that shows the area where, and I'll talk about this shortly, where the Hesdra bench is located. And it's interesting, if again, if you're a long time Nyack resident, to see the names of streets that still exist and no longer exist, and also to see some familiar names. And then this is the historical marker that I was mentioning. One of them was talking about before, which talks about the Nyack Brook and its role in the Underground Railroad. And just a picture here across from Hollingsworth, which I think is First Church in Nyack now. And then again, just a description of what that house looked like, and another map. You'll see, even though it says E.D. Hesdra, that as many of you may or may not know, oftentimes they weren't really respecting women in the way that they respected men. And so you would have the wife might be referred to as Mrs. Edward Hesdra as opposed to as Cynthia Hesdra, but in other documents, we can see that she owned some of the properties that are listed here as E.D. Hesdra. And then I just had a series of images. And again, these may have changed since I last did this particular presentation, but it shows what some of the properties that they owned looked like, about 10 years ago. Okay, and so I'm going to stop sharing there because then I want to talk about some of the wonderful things that have happened since that time, since I did the presentation and tried to raise awareness about Cynthia Hesdra. One thing that's great that happened was that she was added to the Civil Rights Hall of Fame along with her husband. I was pregnant with my youngest son at the time, and so my father attended that induction ceremony and read my remarks for me. But it was a great legacy to have that happen. In addition to that, we were able to get initially a portion of Depew, well, at the corner of Depew and Piermont Avenue, right there, to get that street in that area renamed in honor of Cynthia Hesdra. And I, grateful to Mary White for a lot of things, but she was working for the village in Nyack at the time and helped me figure out how I might go about temporarily renaming a street in honor of Cynthia Hesdra. And when I made a presentation to the board, and Kim Cross was there from the Nyack Center, she suggested that we honor her more permanently. And so I hadn't even thought of that idea. So very grateful and thankful to Mary White and to Kim Cross for that. And so I know that the street sign has been relocated, but it's still in existence. And so, and one of the greatest things that happened not too long ago was that Nyack was selected by the Toni Morrison Society's Bench by the Road project, and was honored with a dedication of a bench in honor of Cynthia Hesdra. And even greater than that, or as great as that, I'll say, we had the great fortune of having Toni Morrison actually at our event. So, she passed away not too long ago, but when it was time for our bench dedication, she was able to come. And again, Mary White was very gracious in escorting her and making sure that she was comfortable. And for those of you that don't know about the bench project, it basically was established after some comments that Toni Morrison made when she was interviewed about the book Beloved. And she essentially said that there are no large monuments to commemorate or to honor the experiences of people of African ancestry who were enslaved. There's no bench by the road, if you will, where you can sit and think about or not think about them. And so the society decided to establish a program that would serve as an outdoor memorial, and they are really serious about it being, community centered and community focused. And so Bill Batson, who many of you know, shared this initiative with me and asked if I would be supportive based upon the research that I had done, if I'd be on the commemorative committee, and there's some other folks on the commemorative committee, and just it's not an easy process. I think to date there are less than 30 benches that have been dedicated throughout the world. And if you think about all the history that's happened relating to people of African ancestry, that's really, really something. And so if you weren't able to attend the actual ceremony, please go on Facebook or Google it. And it's just a beautiful experience with everyone with their yellow umbrellas. It was just a powerful moment, and we were able to commemorate the life and times of Cynthia Hesdra. And I understand that there are some other initiatives going forward that will honor her legacy as well. So I'll stop there and open it up if anyone has questions or comments about anything that I've said or anything else that you might be curious about. I welcome them. And Tracy, I'm not sure how you want to handle that, if people want to unmute themselves or if you prefer that they put their questions in the chat. I'm comfortable either way.
Sure, yeah, we can have them put in the chat.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
I'm not sure whether I'm muted or not. So
I hear you.
Okay, good. Yeah. So just a couple of comments. I really appreciate all the work you did here. It's like I'm a historian myself, so doing research into African Americans history is so much was left behind and forgotten. It's shameful, amongst other things, and it's really so difficult to reconstruct what the world was like and who the people are. I mean, even those descriptions of enslaved people that you mentioned, there's a first name, and that's about all we know of these people. Sometimes the age. It's just incredible that there's so little known. So I don't know if you have a comment on that. I don't. Just while I have the thing, I would just comment on one other thing too, which is because I think often we see, there were a lot of Quakers were involved in the Underground Railroad, but a lot of white people take a lot of credit for the Underground Railroad. But it seems more logical to me, and this is certainly a good example of that the African American community, particularly those that had some wealth, would be a principal part of the Underground Railroad. And I don't know if you have any comment on that. But
yeah, so thank you for your comment. I'll just say, so my area of expertise, as you heard in the introduction, is not the Underground Railroad, and I'm not a historian. My training is in sociology, but I will say, so I can't speak to the Underground Railroad and the extent to which certain groups were or were not involved. And again, from what we do know, it's a secret network. And so naturally, we're not going to know about all the folks that were involved. And then you have some people, as again, I think Alice Crow-Bell has demonstrated, who claim that they participated when there's no evidence to support that they participated. And so you have those kinds of challenges as well. But the one thing that you made me think about was the fact of, why it's so curious that we even learned about Cynthia Hesdra, because at the time that she was living, you didn't really find a lot of positive stories about Black people in general, and maybe no stories about women in particular, especially if they were positive. And so, we end up having some information about some groups of people more than others because of issues like this. If she wasn't a wealthy person, and to answer question in the chat, making her money as as a washerwoman or as a laundry business, then we may have never, learned about her at all. And so the fact that she was wealthy and that there was this battle over her fortune is why we may know more about her than others. And to your question, Alice, as far as I know, no one has been able to locate any pictures of Cynthia or of Edward Hesdra, but I hope someone does. And I didn't actually show you all the headstone, but again, I'll share with you the PowerPoint slides if you're interested. It just basically includes her name and her date of birth when she passed away, and her mother and father. And I've seen some indications that it may have been her headstone may have been recreated. And so, again, talking about the work that Alice Crowbell and others have done, you have a lot of Black cemeteries that have been unkempt. And so sometimes if family members are able to go back and to try to rescue them, they might get headstones that look like the originals, or to honor their family members. So that might have been the case in the case of Cynthia Hesdra. Angela asks, how do the churches that serve African Americans in Rockland County or other places factor into supporting businesses and entrepreneurs like Cynthia? So I didn't come across any of that in terms of her connection with Black churches in Rockland County or their support. It's an interesting question, and I hope that some of you are inspired by some of these questions in the chat that I don't have answers to, that haven't been answered, and that you might want to see if you can find the answers to those questions. So someone said, I was wondering if Miss Hesdra's complexion, which on the document that you showed was listed as white, was able to amass as much wealth, own so much property because her coloration allowed her that breath of freedom to do so. I mean, so there's a lot of research about colorism and looking at the preference that people have sometimes for lighter skinned people relative to darker skin people. And again, this is not something that's unique to people of African ancestry, but it is something that has been documented. And there are scholars, many sociologists, who to this day will compare different Black people based upon their skin tone, and compare them on like their educational level, their income levels, and so forth. And we'll find time and time again that lighter skinned Black people tend to have higher levels of education, income, and socioeconomic status. And there are lots of different theories as to why that might be the case. But so color definitely matters. Alice Crowbell makes a really good and important point. She notes that, as I mentioned, Cynthia Hesdra had an account in the Freedmen's Bank, and the Freedmen's Bank was for Black people. And so, that provides us some indication about how she identified, regardless of how she looked. Oh, and if you have a chance to go back into the census records, I mean, this issue of race is always fascinating, at least to me, because we see, of course, that from a sociological perspective, that race is a social construction, meaning that it's not, we're not ignoring biology totally, but understanding that there are certain social meanings that get attached to different categories, and how artificial these categories are sometimes, and how they change. And so if you look at some of the census records, going back to the early 1800s forward, you'll see that some groups might be in one census described as being of mixed racial ancestry. Other times they might, be listed as a particular racial group. And so it's just fascinating to look at how the racial identities of individuals might change over time.
Dr. Martin,
Yes, Ms. Pratt.
do you think her profession was in her favor, being Black in working with laundry and stuff like that? Because if she was doing something different, then maybe she would have had a harder struggle. That's just an observation.
No, I think that's an excellent point. I mean, some people have argued that one of the worst things that happened to some Black businesses and Black professionals was integration, because prior to that, you know, they had a captive clientele, right? So if you were Black and you wanted to go see a doctor and you didn't have access to going to see a non-Black doctor, you went to the Black doctor. If you know, were going to a pharmacy and you weren't welcome in a pharmacy that was owned by somebody who wasn't Black, you could be welcomed in the pharmacy that was owned by Black people. And so you had, you know, we just, many of us participated in various commemorations about the 100th anniversary of the massacre in Tulsa with Black Wall Street, and how prosperous those people were. Not because, I mean, we know that they were intelligent folks, industrious folks who did well and were successful, but they also were experiencing segregation and they weren't able to compete openly in the market. And so that had some benefits for some people who were well positioned, you know, to be successful. And so I think that's a great point that you made, Ms. Pratt, in terms of how she was able to monetize her expertise in that particular area, and how that may have helped her to be successful. Again, and I don't know to what extent, because her father also did well. And so I'm not sure if, you know, to what extent she might have benefited from those relationships. There's still so many questions that we don't know.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Martin.
Yes.
I'm Rosemary Farrell. I'm Tracy's colleague, and I came on a little late. I noticed in the chat that Michael Hayes asked, Cynthia was born to free people. How did she become enslaved?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so, well, we don't know for sure that the status of her mother. I think that her mother was enslaved, and that is how Cynthia Hesdra got her status. When I mentioned that someone was born to a free person, that's Edward Hesdra. Edward Hesdra's mother, some say, was a former slave of his father, and that he emancipated her after they got married. Others say she was a free woman all along. So not really sure what the truth is there. But in the case of Cynthia Hesdra, I don't have any confirmation that her mother was born enslaved, but my thinking is that her mother was enslaved and that she inherited her mother's status. And at some point in the course of her marriage to Edward Hesdra, that's when she gained her freedom. But thank you for the question. I didn't see that. And to Angela, I don't know how many people she employed, if at all. I didn't come across any of those numbers of anyone working with her. I see there's a question about property she owned in Bergen County. So I mentioned some of them in the book, but I don't know a whole lot of details. What was most interesting is that she's buried in Bergen County, and she's buried in what is now a gated community. So when the Journal News decided to do an article about this particular book and about my research, we wanted to take a picture near the headstone, but we couldn't gain access because it was a gated community. So if you see that newspaper article from 2009, you'll note that they have a picture of me outside of the community, just outside of the gate.
I just have a comment, really. In reading
Sure.
the book, I was just taken with and struck how you can with very little like information about Cynthia, make her come to life and all the people around her and how it kept fanning outward. And it gave me such a picture of that time period and the history of slavery and the intricacies and all the little, like, I mean, growing up in, you know, the United States and going to a regular school, you learn it's very basic stuff about this time period, and it's usually glossed over or not delved into. And a lot of people just associate, oh, slavery was in the South, the North was free. And this really shows how complicated and terrifyingly, like, it's like a, you know, the roots of it everywhere in the country. And
Yeah.
how you took one woman's life and turned and brought to life so much else about our history is really impressive.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your comment. And you also made me think of something else that's really great that came out of not only my work, but the community's commitment to supporting it and to continuing to share the story. Bill Batson and others worked with the Nyack public school system, and a group of really great teachers got on board, and they were able to create a curriculum so that now students in the Nyack school district would know a bit more than they may have known when I was going there, beyond just the life of Cynthia Hesdra, as you mentioned, but to be able to understand more broadly about all of the horrific things that were connected to this particular period in American history, and to, with that understanding, be able to connect it with some of the things that continue to go on even today. Other comments?
Oh, I just want to make a comment, Dr. Martin. First of all, it's fantastic. It's a fantastic topic, and I just think about it being a movie or something like this, like a Self-Made. I don't know if you saw that about Madam C.J. Walker a while back, but have you ever thought about looking at this again and maybe doing a screenplay, or has there been any interest or anything like that? Because it's really a remarkable story.
Well, thank you for that. And I'm going to defer to Alice Crow-Bell and to Alicia Crow, because they're already doing really great work. They did something about desegregation I'm blanking on the town, Hilburn, sorry. So they've done a really great film there. And I know that they were already working on something, The Secrets of the Hollow. So there are individuals like the women that I mentioned that are doing really good work, so that we can share it in different genres, but that's out of my wheelhouse. But I'd be happy to support it in any way possible.
Because it's really surprising that we just don't know. She isn't. I used to work for the Journal News, so I have done some stories, and I actually was there with the Toni Morrison Bench Project.
Oh, very good.
And I just think that, yeah, when you look at her life, it's like she seems like she was so under the radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree, which is what fascinated me about her. And I just was obsessed with her. Seriously, anyone who was around me in 2009 could not stand me. That's all I was talking about was Cynthia Hesdra. And what, it's a powerful lesson too for me. So again, I mentioned that, now I've published or I've edited or written more than 20 books. But when I was working on this project, I was saying, when can I get something published? Like, why doesn't anyone want to offer me a contract? And people started paying attention to Cynthia Hesdra as we were getting her inducted into the Hall of Fame and changing the street name. But look how long it took before Toni Morrison, one of the greatest writers in the world, clearly one of the greatest American writers, to be in our presence to honor her. I mean, it's just mind blowing. And so I say all that to say, you might be doing some work that people may not think is important, or it's not getting the kind of exposure that you think it should get. But you just never know when the timing is going to be right and that people are going to be, inspired and focusing on your work. And so I'm glad that that happened for Cynthia Hesdra. I'm glad it happened for Nyack, because Nyack is people who've been there for a very long time know is a special place. And so it's important that, people like Cynthia Hesdra, places like Nyack get the recognition that they deserve, and to inspire other people as well. Other thoughts or questions?
Are you working on a new book right now? I'm just
So,
curious.
so for I have a couple of my current graduate students on here, Dominique Dillard, and I think I saw Lynette on here as well. And for them, they would consider that a rhetorical question, because I'm always working on something else. And so yes, I am. I'm working on a book project that I wanted to call Duped, but my publishers didn't like that title. And so right now it's tentatively called something like Racial Realism and Racial Inequality, but I'll work on the title. And essentially in this book, what I want to do is to show the many ways that throughout American history that Black people in particular have had high expectations, and that there have been moments where they've been filled with a great deal of hope, only to be disappointed and to go back to experiencing life as, a second-class citizen, et cetera. And so I came across the term duped when I was reading Eddie Glaude's book, Democracy in Black, and thought that that was a really great word to describe how Black people have historically, oh, hey, Mahalia, how Black people have historically felt in this country. And so the book just explores some insights that I have about that. And so that's what I'm working on now. Hopefully I'll finish with the manuscript by the end of the summer, but we'll see.
So with what you just said, it brings up the point in your book about, here was a Black woman who had been a slave at one point. She amassed this fortune. She worked hard. She had her own business. She owned property. And what amazed me, in addition to all that, was she was able to have it in her name, even though she was married. I mean, I think that was not possible for a lot of women, or maybe it's that there were a lot of women. I don't think there were a lot of women like Cynthia Hesdra, but it's just interesting that she was able to break through, I think, in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, so that's a great point, Anne, and I would add that there are so many spin-offs that people can write books about. So you could look at this from purely a legal perspective. Again, as Alice Crowbell has said in the past, and as she was sharing with me, I believe when I was working on this project, is that when you're looking at the history in this period, and when you're looking at it for non-Black people, maybe you can look for certain things in a family Bible, right? But as she was sharing with me, when you're talking about the experiences of Black people during this period, you have to look at the wills and different financial documents, again, because these folks are not being treated as human beings, but as property, as financial instruments, as assets. And so that's where we have to go. And so, maybe someone from a legal perspective, might look at this case in greater depth and to look at some of the financial documents. I think that would be, a fascinating study for someone else. But yes, well, your point is well taken, and to focus more on issues related to gender. So I mean, I think the term intersectionality is overused, but if we look at its origins, it's looking at the unique experiences of Black women. And so looking at the experiences of Black women like Cynthia Hesdra relative to other women is another exciting thing, I think, for someone to pursue. So there are all these different potentials for follow-up projects that I hope, someone will be inspired to complete.
Good evening.
Hey, Dorothea.
Hi, how's everyone? Good evening. I just want everyone to know that this book is not new. Lori has been writing since she's been in college, and this is the book. This was one of the first copies that she gave me, one of the first copies of this book. If you can get your hands on it, by all means, please. This is fascinating. It mentions Rockland County, Sparkill, St. Charles, everything, and it gives a detailed history of Cynthia Hesdra. So I just wanted to shout out to my beloved friend. She's
Well, thank you.
And to show everyone, this is not new. This was the beginning of Lori's storied career in book writing. And I'm just so proud to call her my friend and to have one of the first copies of this book, which I have in I call it my Lori library, because everything she writes, she indeed makes me a part of, and I'm just so proud and happy. I love her so much. And the Burns family is my family. So I just wanted everyone to know this is not the ending of Lori's career. This is the beginning. And this book was one of the first ones she ever wrote.
Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate
Oh, you're so
everything.
welcome. That's quite a lot. I
And-
know you do. I know you
and-
do.
and I'll just say, I think besides my parents, Dorothea is probably the only other person that has close to a full set of all the books that I have done. But again, I really appreciate all of you for being on here. Again, to my students, Mahalia, who I'm just finished a great milestone in her career. Again, to Dominique and Lynette, appreciate you all taking the time out of your schedule. Again, and happy anniversary to my parents. And, also just want to recognize again, Mary White and Francis Pratt and Dorothea Swan, all these folks who knew me when I couldn't get through an Easter speech without crying and are still here with me. I appreciate all of you. And so I'll turn it back over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming. I put a link to the exit survey in the chat, and visit our nyacklibrary.org if you want to find out more about our other programs in this. Thank you, Dr. Martin, for being here. Appreciate it.
I also wanted to just add real quickly, and when I was reading your book, Dr. Martin, I noticed that there was a part in one of the chapters that referenced the urban renewal program or urban renewal in Nyack in the late 50s, 60s. And I just want to let everyone know who's here, if they're interested, next Wednesday night, June 16th, the library is hosting a program about that topic, urban renewal in Nyack and its effect on the African-American community at the time. It's a panel. Bill Batson is one of the panelists, Wynn Perry from the Historical Society, and we have three community members who are directly affected by the urban renewal program who are going to be on the panel as well. So if anyone's interested, please go register at the our website. It's another Zoom program, so it's virtual.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, Dr. Martin.
Thank you.